Putting a gradient on the floor of the tunnel wouldn't be straightforward. Firstly, as it rotated, it lifted away from the facade, creating a gap, though this was easily covered over with brackets. Secondly, the edges would be pushed outward towards surrounding pieces, and it looked like I may only get half a degree of rotation. I considered shortening the floor and creating something to fill the void, but it was already a delicate structure without breaking it into further sections. I also didn't want the floor to look too slanted, so I figured I'd give it a go and see how it went. It was surprisingly easy installing the floor at this angle. By complete accident, I'd chosen a length that needed raising half a plate at one end to tilt it half a degree. So how would Sonic roll on it? Well, that doesn't look right. The slant on my desk was kind of screwing me here. I made some tweaks to the lift arm drivers at this point to reduce the size and to add in some adjustability. As jams were occurring, they'd be thrown out of sync, and resetting them meant pulling things apart, so I made changes to allow gears to be moved in and out of position, allowing me to freely rotate the arms. While test bouncing Sonic, I noticed something was stopping him again at the base of the tunnel, and it wasn't the pinch point. This time I traced it to the edge of the first curve in my guide rail. As tight as LEGO's tolerances are, there was the tiniest of ridges between the curve and the brick attached to it, which the dish was colliding with. I swapped around some of the bricks to try and smooth the joint out, then turned the build in the direction of the desk's slant to give it a test run. Five successful runs. Pretty good, but we want this to run continuously. I wondered if the slightly loose posts the elastic band was wrapped around could be having a negative impact on the bouncing, so I replaced it with a sturdier pin-axle combo. Well, that seems a big improvement, though it may not have been down to the change. I decided to swap out the brick guide rail for lift arms to eliminate the chance of snagging on joins. The slope at the base of the tunnel could still be an issue, though it did run okay in a quick test. We'd had a good number of successful test runs now, but it still wasn't a 100% success rate. The floor's 0.5 degree gradient was being negated by the desk, but there would be no guarantee the model would always be displayed on a perfectly level surface, so I felt something more reliable was needed. Ideas man Greasyfro proposed using propellers to blow Sonic back to the tunnel. I was a little unsure about the idea, but figured I'd give it a shot. However, a terrible tragedy occurred on my journey to retrieve the propellers. She was fine. I found 3 different sized propellers, but initial testing had no effect, and I couldn't feel any airflow against my hand. I ramped up the gear ratio to 1:15, which gave a good strong flow with the largest propeller, but a propeller this size was going to be difficult to conceal. Sadly, the smaller propellers still gave insufficient output, but Greasyfro had one other idea which could potentially deliver the force in a much more manageable package. I knew absolutely nothing about pneumatics. I didn't even understand the differences between pumps and cylinders, so I first tested whether anything I had would create sufficient air pressure to move Sonic. The small blue thing didn't move him at all, and the big yellow thing only moved him a few millimeters. I had previously built the Forest machine, which used only one small blue thing to move 2 big yellow things, and it didn't use any air tanks to store air, so I didn't understand how it created enough pressure to do so. I knew I would likely need a way of storing and releasing air, as if I were to use a continuous delivery system, Sonic might be prevented from reaching the spring. Clearly having no idea what I was doing here, I consulted the unofficial Technic guide once more. I didn't find it really offered any clarity on the difference between pumps and cylinders, but there was a section on air compressors. I made an effort combining some small yellow things and some big yellow things, but results were poor, so I kind of gave up for now. One of the issues with Sonic's return to the tunnel was overshooting, then rolling back beyond the mark. I had an idea in my mind of something catching and holding Sonic when he reached the tunnel, but that same thing would need to allow clear passage on the first pass down the tunnel, yet not completely prevent the first rotating arm from pushing Sonic. I figured some kind of angled lift arm could possibly do the trick. If the force of Sonic hitting it from one direction would push the short end out of the way, then the weight of the long end would drop it back, forming a barrier for Sonic's return. But the barrier would need to stop and hold Sonic, preventing him from rolling back, but still allowing him to move forward. I tried a quick test, which actually worked perfectly, for the first part at least, and I wondered whether an elastic band would provide the required resistance for the next part. I tried the elastic band at a few distances from the lift arm, but couldn't find a placement I was happy with. I also wasn't happy with the position of the arm in the digital model, and wondered whether a wider angled arm would work better, but soon realised it would only cause issues. But then I wondered how it might perform turned the other way up. The elbow had a nice angle for Sonic to strike moving in either direction. I was careful to keep the elastic band out the way of any moving parts, but that didn't stop other technical difficulties occurring on the test run. I'd introduced the gear with a clutch, so any jams would now only stall this rather than breaking things. This didn't seem to be the stepper jamming, but as I'd recently discovered a more resilient stepper design, I decided to rebuild it. The new system used a slowly rotating cam to push an arm on a turn wheel 90 degrees, once every full rotation. Two L-shaped lift arms pulled together by an elastic band helped clamp the turn wheel's axle to prevent free rotation but still allow the desired movement. Once installed, it didn't quite move the tunnel's lower lift arm over 2 units, but I thought it should still be enough. The next issue was with the turn wheel I'd used on the axle moved by the stepper. Occasionally the arms were jamming against the arms of the 3 turn wheels on the adjacent axle. I'd decided against 16-tooth gears as I was concerned the moving gear may skip as it shifted between the adjacent gears due to gaps between the teeth of each. Beveled gears were a much better choice, but as the axles were 2 units apart, it meant pairing different gears together. This meant I was effectively gearing up or down one axle, which wasn't really an issue, but I did have to change my upper lift arm to match. The new system worked great, for several seconds. Unfortunately, the stepper's new frame was causing a new jam, as the arm responsible for moving the lower rotating lift arm was colliding with it. I could have possibly thinned it down to a single thin lift arm, but leaving connections looking unfinished doesn't sit right with me. There wasn't too big a job extending the framework out 1 unit, and look how smoothly that's running. Time for another test run. We may well have cracked it. Well, so long as it's kept running on a level surface. I really need to get that desk sorted.